Hey everyone, welcome back to this explainer. Look, today we're diving into a sport where absolute extreme human endurance literally collides head-on with incredible temptation. We're going to trace the wild, almost unbelievable evolution of cheating in professional cycling. We're talking everything from the frankly absurd, kind of comical physical shortcuts back in the early 1900s, right up to the super sophisticated, highly medicalized gray areas of 2026. Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to just put yourself in this scenario for a second. Imagine you're at the starting line of the 1904 Tour de France. You're sitting on this incredibly heavy steel bike. You're wearing thick, roasting hot wool clothes, and you've got a punishing 2,000-mile road stretching out ahead of you. So, what's your strategy? How do you win? Do you A, train rigorously for 6 months? B, hop on a literal train for the middle 50 miles? Or C, just have your fans beat up your rivals with sticks? Well, the absurd truth here is that early riders frequently chose B and C. In those early days, cheating wasn't just common, it was practically a spectator sport. Take Maurice Garin, the guy who actually won that 1904 Tour. He was disqualified months after his victory because officials figured out that he and a bunch of other riders had literally taken a train to skip the most grueling parts of the course. You really can't make this stuff up. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole chronological escalation arc we're mapping out today. We start way back in 1904 with the Wild West of cycling, then we'll move to a super dark turning point in 1967 with the age of amphetamines, hit the absolute explosion of the EPO era in 2012, and finally arrive at the modern gray zone of 2026. It's essentially a century-long cat-and-mouse game between cheaters looking for any edge and authorities desperately trying to catch them. So let's look a little closer at that Wild West era. Back then, what they considered cutting-edge doping wasn't even illegal. It was just, science. Riders would chug copious amounts of red wine simply to numb the agonizing pain in their legs. They'd chew on ether-soaked sugar cubes to forcibly stay awake on those ridiculously long stages. We even have records showing riders getting a sneaky tow up the mountains from a team car by clamping their teeth down on a cork tied to a string. Just wild. Now, what's really interesting here is understanding the mindset of the era. Just listen to the Policier brothers. These guys were absolute legends of the sport in the 1920s. They once famously emptied their racing bags out for a journalist to proudly show off exactly what fueled them. They explicitly stated they ran on a, quote, cocktail of cocaine, chloroform, and horse pills. I mean, think about that. This highlights exactly how dangerous and completely unregulated these early, amateurish cocktails actually were. They were pushing the human body right to the absolute brink. As we transition past World War II, moving into the 1950s through the 1980s, the cocktails got significantly more dangerous. We enter the era of La Bamba, which basically meant amphetamines. Now, these pills chemically convinced riders they were completely invincible. But the real danger? It was terrifying. The amphetamines ruthlessly masked the body's natural warning signals. That meant a rider wouldn't even know their body was literally shutting down and dying from exhaustion right beneath them. And tragically, that brings us to a devastating turning point in 1967, up on the brutal, barren slopes of Mont Ventoux. British cycling star Tom Simpson pushed himself until he collapsed, and he tragically died right there on the mountain. When officials reached him, they actually found vials of amphetamines stuffed in his pocket. It's a very dark moment in the sport's history for sure, but an absolutely essential one to understand. This very public tragedy is exactly why modern cycling has the strict rulebook we see today. It finally forced the authorities to wake up and get serious about testing. Let's move to the 1990s and see how this builds, because we leave the amateur hour behind entirely here and enter an era of real industrial-scale cheating. This is the age of EPO. For those who remember, this specific hormone didn't just give a slight edge. It artificially boosted red blood cell counts so drastically that it essentially turned a rider's blood into absolute rocket fuel. And of course, you simply cannot discuss the EPO era without confronting the Lance Armstrong years. For 7 years, the guy was the undisputed king of the cycling world. But when the truth finally came out in 2012, it didn't just ruin his career. It nearly destroyed the entire sport's credibility. Federal investigators later described his operation bluntly, calling it the most sophisticated doping program in history. So, the crucial point here is that Lance's era wasn't just about some single rogue athlete deciding to pop a few pills. No, it was a massive, systematic super team operation.
We are talking about a highly coordinated system. They had private jets moving illicit supplies across borders, secret blood transfusions happening in random hotel rooms, and honestly, perhaps worst of all, the systematic intimidation of anyone who dared to speak the truth. It was a completely ruthless machine.
Now, I want you to contrast that wild history with where we are today. It is a fascinating leap. We've gone from riders sipping wine, chewing ether, and literally jumping on trains to a hyper-policed modern era. Now authorities are relentlessly hunting for mechanical doping. We're talking about riders hiding tiny illegal motors deep inside their bike frames. To catch them, officials in 2026 are actively deploying thermal cameras and super sophisticated X-ray vans right at the finish line just to scan the bikes.
But hey, make no mistake, the cheating hasn't stopped. It's just evolved. It has fully moved into a highly medicalized gray zone. A perfect example of this is carbon monoxide rebreathing. Teams claims they were just using this technique for testing purposes, but critics argued it was actually a sneaky way to artificially spike hemoglobin levels. Exploiting loopholes is basically the name of the game today, right up until authorities officially closed them, which, actually, the UCI and WADA did by banning this exact practice just this year.
So here is the 2026 battlefield. Yes, the sport is vastly cleaner than it was in the days of La Bamba or the wild EPO era, but the moral debate, it's fiercer than ever. The new frontier is the medicalization of the sport. We're talking about the use of legally debated ketones and incredibly powerful painkillers. Now, they aren't technically banned by the rulebook, but they sit right on that jagged, highly debated moral borderline of performance enhancement. Which leads us right to our final thought for this explainer. At its very core, professional cycling is a sport defined by immense, grueling suffering. And as long as there is suffering and a finish line, the temptation to find a shortcut is always going to exist. It's just human nature, right? So I want to leave you with this question to think about. Will pro cycling ever be 100% clean? Or is innovative cheating simply an inevitable part of the game? I would absolutely love to hear your take on this, so drop your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your curiosity alive, and I will see you in the next one.